Through the years, Rapid City has seen a variety of changes, many in the forms of progress, others in the forms of necessity. One day in particular that stands out is June 9th, 1972. A day that lives on in infamy, while many live on in memory. Connect with us as we look back on how the flood of '72 reshaped Rapid City.
On this beautiful afternoon, we're here with Chief Emeritus Bob Riggio.
I still can't get used to that emeritus.
You're still chief to me.
Emeritus. Emeritus.
Yeah.
That just, you know what that means, don't you? That just means I've been doing this for a long, long, long time.
It sounds prestigious, though.
It does. But I've seen a lot of changes in the weather service over that period of time.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh my goodness.
And from the flood to now, 1,000 times improvement in the warning system. 1,000 times improvement. Back then, urgent. The word that comes to me a lot, Brant, when I think back when I was here on June 9th, 1972, is the word urgent. At what point did the folks that were living along the creek, as we're close to this creek, or living near it, when did they realize the situation was urgent for them to move to higher ground, for them to leave their homes and move to higher ground? At what point in time? And for many of them, it came way too late. Way too late.
I think when you're talking about unprecedented events, and that even goes for things that happen today around the world, when you have something that hasn't happened before,
yes,
you learn a lot, but it doesn't give you a lot of solace, even after the fact, that this event still happened. You're like, man, I wish there was something I could have done. I cannot imagine. Bob, when I drove here, when I first came here to Rapid City, I saw this beautiful greenery, these great big parks. I said, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe that, the city would put aside all this area for greenery
yes,
and whatnot. And this was when I was 12 years old with my grandfather coming up here to Rapid City. He says, well, there was a flood here. I said, okay, there was a flood. Okay, but not that much. I mean, that's half the city. He says, yeah.
Yeah. Think about it, Brant. The population in the 70s for Rapid City, I would say just over 40,000 people. In that one night, 238 people lost their life in that one night. Over 3,000 people were injured. Many of them found themselves floating down Rapid Creek, reaching out for branches on treetops, trying to pull themselves out of the rushing water. Homes lifted off their foundation, moved out onto Jackson Boulevard and ended up on Jackson Boulevard. People driving, thinking they could drive through the floodwaters, their cars were washed away. It's just amazing, and I'm so happy. Some people are saying, it happened 50 years ago, let's move on. No, you can't move on because it could happen again. And you know that, it could happen again. All of the pieces to the perfect storm puzzle that occurred back on June 9th could occur again. And when they do occur again, we could have 15 inches of rain in a 6-hour period like we had back then. I mean, it could definitely happen again.
It's not an if, it's a when.
Yes.
And it's about being prepared. Do you think we're more prepared today?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I can't say that enough. We are most definitely. Back then, collecting the data, Remembrance data, balloons that measures the atmosphere, collecting that data, collecting surface data, that's all done by hand. Analyzing the data, plotting the data, all done by hand. That takes time. And displaying that information so the public could understand it, all done by hand. Today, it's computer. It's all done by computer. And computers are so much faster and in many respects so much smarter, so that information can get out to the public a lot quicker. Plus it's more accurate. It's going to be more accurate and more refined. Back then, we just had this big broad area of heavy rain. Now with Doppler radar, which we didn't have back then, now with Doppler radar you can actually pinpoint within the line of showers where the heavy rain is occurring. And you could focus in on that with your warnings and be more precise with your warnings. Back then we couldn't do that.
Tell me a little bit about this setup, because this is what I've read over and over, trying to understand. That way, if something in the future like this were to happen, it's like, hey, these are some things coming together that I've seen before. What are some of the things that set up that day? And you talked about it a little bit.
To get rain, for a rain shower to develop, you need three things. You know this, you need moisture. And my gosh, we had moisture back then, copious amount of moisture. And we need instability. You need cold air over warm air. And we had that. We had a pocket of cold air aloft and warm air near the surface. We had the instability. And you need a trigger. You need something to kick it off. And we had that. We had a surface trough, and that was the trigger for that event. But we needed something, but even with that, we get rain showers. Oh, you may get an inch, you may get a couple of inches. Right. The rain showers develop over the Black Hills. You've seen it, I've seen it 1,000 times. And then once they develop, they slide off the Black Hills, move out into the prairies. We didn't have that ability on June 9th, 1972. The winds aloft, the steering winds, were not there to push these thunderstorms off the Black Hills.
They just sat there.
They just sat there. They were going, and the Black Hills themselves, they're not going anywhere. They're sitting there. So we have this copious amount of moisture, this low-level jet coming in from the southeast, and that's something else. Usually at sunset, that begins to weaken. That begins to lessen the input of moisture into these storms. Not on June 9th. This thing stayed up 40 miles per hour throughout the after sunset, around even up to midnight. 40-mile-per-hour winds pumping in this copious amount of moisture from the southeast. And these storms just sat there. There was no winds aloft to push them off the Black Hills. The Black Hills weren't about to move, so they just sat there and produced 100% of that moisture. 100% of that moisture coming in turned into rain on the ground. 100%. And again, another rare happening.
And that's where we get the term precipitable water. How much precipitable water are we looking at?
A light shower, maybe 20%. A strong thunderstorm, maybe 50, 60%. 100% on June 9th, 1972. So all that copious amount of moisture. The morning sounding at Huron, South Dakota, had a historic amount of moisture in their atmosphere. And that moisture moved into the Black Hills throughout the afternoon and evening hours on that day.
It's hard for me to visualize that, because I understand the parameters you're talking about.
Yeah.
16 inches of rain.
Yeah.
That's almost a year. That's a year's worth of rain.
Near Johnson's Siding, they recorded somewhere like 6 inches an hour. Radar recorded 6 inches an hour of rain near Johnson's Siding. That's again, that's historic. We didn't see it prior to June 9th, and we haven't seen it since June 9th.
No,
but it can happen again. It certainly can happen again.
I mean, you get an inch an hour up here, and that causes problems. You get flash flooding from an inch an hour. Back in 2018, 2019, my first year here, I just remember how much water we got that year. And we're starting to see a little bit of greenery this year too. And I saw some of these thunderstorms that would develop over the northern Black Hills, or you had the water that washed out one of the bridges in Sturgis about a year or two ago. And I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of water. And then I go back and I see how that compares to the 72 flood. We're not even in the same universe.
We're not in the same universe, that's right.
Ronald and Levon Masters had been living in Rapid City for around 3 years before the 1972 flood. While at a softball game, they noticed dark clouds in the distance, which eventually came and dumped a soaking rain on them. The couple and their 5 children left for home soon after, where they got the children ready for bed before visiting friends. About an hour into the visit, they received a call from their oldest daughter, Karen.
She said, "They're telling us we need to be out of our houses now if we live along the creek." And we did. We lived across the street from the creek.
On Jackson Boulevard, we were the first house on the west side of the bridge.
They dressed up the children and prepared to leave in their car. A short time later, a 35-foot wall of water came, taking out the Canyon Lake Dam and spilling onto the road.
The first wall of water hit us, and then just took the vehicle, spun it around in a circle, and was right to the water, and then we floated right across the creek and down into a little lower place and got caught between the gigantic cottonwood trees that are out there.
All 5 kids were in the back of the car: Karen, Joanne, Timothy, Jonathan, and Stephen, when more water came flooding inside. Ronald managed to free both himself and his wife from their vehicle, and eventually his daughter Karen. In total darkness, they held on, clinging to nearby trees through the night. The water did not begin to recede until the early hours of the morning, eventually revealing the window they escaped from and a voice.
Joanne, our daughter, came floating over to the water and came right up to my eyes.
Joanne had found an air pocket in the submerged vehicle. Their sons, however, died during the night. Jonathan and Stephen, both with Joanne, had suffocated. Their youngest, Timothy, had been lost to the water as Ron was freeing his wife and daughter Karen. Timothy's body was discovered later. Since that night, and even now, they've kept to their faith and shared their story all across the country.
You know, we've all had tragedies, some deeper, some not as hard, but harsh. And life is full of those things to remind us this world is not our home. This world is not our home. And
we're just traveling through.
We're just traveling through.
I want to talk a little bit about the warning system back then, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Around 7:15, the National Weather Service put out a flood warning, around 7:15 on that night. And that was just for the Northern Hills. That did not include the central Black Hills. It did not include Rapid City. So, eventually, the storms up around Pactola began to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the National Weather Service said, "Oh, well, we need to extend it to include the Central Black Hills and Rapid City." That didn't happen until 8 o'clock at night. So 8 o'clock at night, and the one and only TV station we had, KOTA, was running crawls. They were running crawls. So I'm thinking. Well, first of all, I was playing cards at my friend's house, so I wasn't watching TV. And the sense of urgency that I was mentioning before, I had no sense of urgency at all, because this moisture that was streaming in from the southeast was passing over Rapid City and feeding those storms upstream of Rapid Creek, about 10 miles upstream.
Yeah.
So here in Rapid City, it's not raining. It's not. We're seeing the clouds, but it's just not, if it was raining, it was raining on the light side. So I'm seeing, if you see this crawl at 8 o'clock that now includes Rapid City and it says flood warning for Rapid City, what would you do? I mean, and you've seen it in years past, and the creek would rise and the creek would fall, and the creek would rise and the creek would fall, and the people that live near the creek, the water certainly never reached their house. So now they're seeing it again, flood warning for Rapid City. Let me go look at the creek and go out here, look at Rapid Creek. Maybe it was bank full, maybe it wasn't. So there's no urgency now because it's not flooding, even though we see this warning being run across the TV screen. So at 10 o'clock, when the news came on, again, they didn't project, as I understand, again, I wasn't watching it, but as I have been told, a sense of urgency to the people. It wasn't until after that newscast that the mayor came on and implored the people that lived along the creek to move to higher ground because the surge of floodwaters coming down from the Black Hills is expected to cause major flooding.
And about what time do you think that was?
I would say 10:30, 10:35.
So people are going to bed.
Many of them are in bed. Yes, many of them are in bed after looking at the creek and saying, I don't see any flooding here. But not realizing that the heavy rain was just maybe 10 miles to the west of Rapid City in the Rapid Creek Basin. Heavy rain up there. So, and at 10:45, the earthen dam gave way. And that's when, and this is, I have a problem with this, and maybe you could help me. They were calling for a flood warning. Now, a flood to me, Brant, is this creek getting bank full, out of its banks, getting higher and higher, a progression that people could see it coming and then move to higher ground. But this was a tsunami. I would say is like a miniature tsunami. Once that earthen dam gave way, you had a wall of water, 13, 15 feet high, rushing down Rapid Creek. So those folks that watched the newscast and said, well, a warning, I've been through these warnings before, you know, the cry wolf syndrome that we need to get rid of. It's not going to happen again. I'm going to bed. Not knowing that the earthen dam would give way in 15 minutes and this wall of water would come and just lift their homes up and carry them downstream.
And if we were here at that, I mean, this is.
Well, it'd be way over our heads. It would be way over our heads.
Over a foot of rain fell from the evening of June 9th to the morning of June 10th in 1972, taking thousands of homes and cars and hundreds of lives. As the mayor of Rapid City, Don Barnett was tasked with making sure hope for his town didn't wash away too.
It was a night of absolute terror and absolute frenzy, and because we knew that we were failing to save everybody. Of course, there was the grief issue. I'd been told that we had lost 3 firemen and 1 policeman, and that brought me to instant tears. But we had to buckle up and look beyond the grief and come up with a solution to the physical damages to the city.
There were also massive infrastructure issues, with hospitals flooded, water plants in ruins, and no homes for anyone who had once lived along the river.
The feds really helped us. They gave us about $50 million to relocate something like 1,700 homes from the floodplain near Rapid Creek, and then we converted that land to recreational and scenic improvements, and it made Rapid City one of the most beautiful and gorgeous cities in America.
Changes to policy followed, designed to prevent such widespread loss in the instance of a rapid rise of the creek.
Well, I think one of the most gigantic policy changes that the City Council in their wisdom made was to not allow the citizens of Rapid City to repair their homes so near the creek. And that evolved into an evacuation of the urban floodplain, and that meant that we created this recreational avenue that now runs from Canyon Lake way down to the fairground.
Local officials, many of whom were survivors themselves, used their positions to advocate for the town.
Those city councilmen loved the city as deeply as I did, and we governed as a team. And I think that was the hallmark of the recovery. But those people who set the example were the survivors of the flood. They lost their home, they might have lost a family member, but they picked up sticks. They didn't demonstrate to me a lot of self-pity, and they were determined to survive.
Having gone through the flood, how did that influence the way you forecast? How you forecasted moving forward from that time?
It upped the sense of responsibility that you have to the public. The public, they trust you. They look for someone to trust. And it just ups that you feel like you got to do the best job you can. You got to do the best job you can. You got to stay on top of it. You just can't go on the air and say, here's the forecast, and then forget about it. You have to stay on top of it because, as you said earlier, things change with time. And if something is developing that you didn't forecast, you need to get that information out to the public. And today we have that ability to do that. I worry that the people develop this crying wolf syndrome. They say, well, he said there's going to be a tornado, there wasn't a tornado. That's what I worry about a lot.
Yeah.
But again, with the instrumentation we have and the ability to get the information out as quickly as we have and getting the data as quickly as we can nowadays, I really think that we're making headway on this cry wolf syndrome.
Oh yeah.
I really think and I'm not saying this to promote you, I'm saying this because it's a fact. The forecasts are much more accurate than they've ever been, because of computers in a large sense.
You know how I know? I get people that send me a message.
Yeah.
Hey, you called for 3 inches of snow. I only got 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good job, Brent.
And you're like, that's 20 years ago. You put a forecast out. Hey, we might get some snow, but somewhere between 2 to 10 inches. And sometimes it just didn't snow at all. And that still happens today. Listen, it still happens, especially up here. But that fuels me.
But
Is that weird?
It doesn't happen as back then. It happened, believe me, a lot more than it happens now.
Right.
A lot more back then than it happens now.
Folks have been so forgiving that I've talked to, at least here in the Black Hills, because I think when you live here and you grow up here, especially if you've been somewhere else and then you come out here, you realize that this place is a little different. There's a different vibe, as it were, as they would call it.
Yes, this is an agriculture area, and agriculture, on one hand, is crops, rangeland, cattle, and right next to that is the weather. What's the weather? That's so important to them, and the weather forecasting here is extremely important, not only for the severe weather events, but also just for the moisture that these ranchers and farmers need, or lack thereof. Exactly. That's right.
Wildfires, supercells, windstorms, blizzards, floods.
And we have the ability to get that information out, and I just hope that those folks receiving that information take it seriously.
Yes. Making sure that using the detailed instruments that we have, I think it's almost more important to say, hey, this is not as big of a threat as we believed it to be, rather than we should up this up just in case, because we're going to have 1,000 just in case scenarios, and that completely tunes out your audience. It tunes them out. They don't hear that anymore. Part of the reason why I like to go and study hurricanes and tornadoes and go and experience these events is so that when I tell people, hey, we're going to get 60-mile-per-hour winds, I better darn well know what that looks like, what that does, what it's capable of, and what you're actually telling people when you say that.
Yeah.
That's been one of my big objectives up here, is to study weather on scene as it's happening to understand that.
Growing up in Rapid City, Troy Dobbins vividly remembers that fateful day, June 9th of 1972. 50 years later, he decided to write a book documenting history and his family's life. In his book, Dobbins accounts 7 different stories that are revealed through several accounts of the family, but mostly through the eyes of the then 8-year-old author.
The one thing you got to understand about my mom's side of the family is that they all live on the same side of town. So they were very close-knit, and in 1972 they lived in a trailer court that was here behind Fisher Furniture. And you look at it today and you can't believe there was a trailer court down here, but there was, and they all lived here. And for years I wasn't able to talk about it. I would just start shaking and all kinds of things, but I got past that, and this book has really been therapeutic in letting go of a lot of stuff. I didn't realize till I started writing it how much I was hanging on to. It was a day kind of like this, but it was a little bit hotter. There was no breeze kicking around, so me and my cousins are out riding bikes and sweating it up. We were actually moving out of this trailer court that day. My mom and dad found a house in Piedmont, and we were moving out, and we took their bed and some boxes out there. Everything else we had was in here. The dam broke at 11:30. So, and I think that's why so many people died, because they were in bed. They were just taken by surprise. There were, before, when it was just raining really heavy, there was some scrolls on the TV saying if you live near the creek, you should go to higher ground. We're 3 blocks from the creek, so we didn't think that included us. When the water came down Jackson Boulevard, it built up dams of debris, and then that would break away in another one. So it was more like tidal wave after tidal wave after tidal wave coming down and picking up more and more. And when I say debris, I don't mean like sticks and patio furniture. I mean houses and trucks, and so those things would crash into each other, and it was a nightmare. And the fact that my family all survived, it's more of a story of survivorship. You definitely always think about the 238 families that lost somebody. That's hard to take. There is a woman and a baby buried in the Spearfish graveyard that was in the flood, and I don't know them, I don't know anything about them, but Memorial Day, I always take flowers up there. It's like a kinship there. You know, you start talking to someone else that was in the flood, and it's like you've known them forever. And I think even people in Rapid that wasn't in the flood but was here at the time, it was a very, very strong community. And of course, there are more people we don't know what happened to them. So most of the people that we were friends with, never saw them again. So whether they lived or not, I don't know.
Going back to the June 9th flood, as I said earlier, you know, we had this low-level jet, never seen before. We're sending up pie balls. I was involved in a cloud seeding research program back then as well, so we were sending up pie balls, which are basically measuring the winds, wind direction and speed. And one measurement on that night measured up at 10,000 feet, a 75-mile-per-hour wind. Low-level jet, 75 mile per hour coming in from the southeast.
That's a lot.
That's
a lot.
That 40 to 45 is a lot, but when you see 75, that's actual measured wind speed and direction. 75. So, and again, never happened before. Probably.
Yeah.
Probably hasn't happened since, but it can certainly happen again.
You think about a jet engine getting fuel pumped into it, and
yeah,
you got a little bit, and if you're pushing a lot in there all at once, you're just going to, you're going to see some pretty incredible things out of the weather if you have those parameters.
As I said earlier, I did not sense any urgency that night. I was at some friend's house over on Floorman Street and near Sheridan Lake Road. And about 2 blocks toward Meadowbrook, that's where the flood was, Meadowbrook Elementary, just on the other side of Meadowbrook, the golf course there. So I was just a couple of blocks away from the edge of the flood. And I wasn't watching TV, so the sense of urgency, I didn't sense any problems because it wasn't raining. I left the house there, my friend's house. I lived over in Robbinsdale, so I had to drive through the gap. And if it was raining, it wasn't raining hard. This must have been about 11:30 after the dam was breached. So I go up toward Jackson Boulevard on Sheridan Lake Road. If I would have turned left, I would have driven right into the floodwaters, and I would have seen just how catastrophic this event was. I turned right to head toward the gap, and I got down to the Mountain View and Jackson Boulevard.
Yeah.
There the water was just funneling through the gap, and I realized there's no way I'm going through the gap this evening. And Bacon Park was underwater. One of the businesses was on fire, and only at that time did I realize how catastrophic this situation was.
What was your first thought when you realized this was an urgent situation? What do I do? Where do I go?
Exactly. Well, I saw it, and what I did, I turned around and went back to my friend's house and just spent the night there. I didn't really see how bad it was until the next day.
Oh my goodness.
And then I saw houses on Jackson Boulevard. And the folks, I'm sure you've seen photos of the cars piled up, piggyback on one another. And my job over that weekend was to locate cars in the creek and check and make sure there was no bodies in the car. That was horrific. You know, every time I'd see a car, I'd just pray, don't have a body in that car, don't have a body in that car. So that's my experience.
That's surreal.
And again, I'm going to say this one more time, with the warning systems we have now, those kinds of deaths and injuries and businesses being destroyed should be lessened quite a bit with the warning system that we have in place now.
The city of Rapid City, South Dakota is probably best known for its proximity to Mount Rushmore, but 40 years ago, a flash flood put that city on the map for a very different reason. NBC's Kevin Tibbles is in Rapid City this morning for us. Kevin, good morning.
Lester, on that day 40 years ago, the panicked residents of Rapid City would have been frantically searching for loved ones swept away by a wall of water that wiped out much of this town. Today, they pause to remember, but also celebrate what Rapid City has now become. 40 years ago, in June of 1972, Rapid City resembled a war zone, rather than the picturesque little city nestled beside Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills of South Dakota.
We'll begin this evening with the tragic flood story in South Dakota.
And the property damage will be in the tens of millions of dollars.
Jim Simpson was 9 years old.
But when the lightning would flash, you would get these black and white snapshots of hell.
A massive flash flood roared out of the hills, sweeping away everything in its path, including Simpson and his 18-year-old sister-in-law, Claudia.
Claudia went one direction and I went another, and I ended up in one of these trees down here, and
never saw her again.
Never saw her again.
Claudia was among 238 people who died in the deluge brought on by 15 inches of rain in just 6 short hours. Simpson clung to the tree until being rescued by the National Guard. Total devastation. More than 1,300 homes and businesses swept away, along with 5,000 cars.
No one knows precisely how many people were left homeless by these floods.
Damages topped $100 million even 40 years ago.
It looked just like a junkyard out here. And there was a cloud of death that just surrounded the entire Rapid Creek area through the city here.
Don Barnett was the city's mayor back then. He was only 29 years old. He'd never been on national TV before.
I sincerely hope that by the end of next week we can begin to do some construction to put these suffering people into homes.
For survivors like the Brunice family, the muck and misery was overwhelming. Mother, father, and all 6 children survived.
I remember the sounds. I remember the trees being down, the chaos, and then I remember the people.
Their home somehow remained standing, but was full of debris. Still, Ken Brunice vowed to remain in Rapid City.
Chances are it won't happen again in our lifetime.
Is Trudy going to come up and win something?
Today, he is 86 years old. And you weren't going to let the flood chase you out?
Nope. We'd have probably built right back on the creek if we could have.
But no new homes would ever be built along Rapid Creek again. Families were relocated to higher ground. Instead, the city went about creating an elaborate and beautiful series of parks, bike paths, and golf courses.
You know, the scar that was the flood in '72 is the beauty that we have now.
I'm so proud of this city. I just can't believe it sometimes. New and wonderful things have happened in Rapid City. It's one of the most progressive and beautiful cities in the Great Plains.
Jim Simpson will never forget that harrowing night spent clinging to a tree, and he is proud of what his city has become.
There was that element of, from this, you had to basically get right back, rebuilding your life.
The bodies we recovered, it's been a terrible experience for everybody involved.
For everything that was lost in the 1972 Black Hills flood, there are stories left behind. To mark the 50th anniversary of the flood, the Rapid City Public Library is putting those stories on the record.
The following interview was conducted with Del Rita Shelton on behalf of Rapid City Public Library for the Oral History Project.
The stories began with Del Rita Shelton, who moved to Rapid City shortly before the flood from Torrington, Wyoming. On the night of the flood, after supper, the manager of their mobile home knocked on their door.
He came by and he said, well, you might want to leave. This is after 10 o'clock. Because there's a lot of water.
Shelton and her husband Don packed a few of their baby's belongings and left that night to stay with a friend. The next morning, they returned to find their home gone.
Our mobile home didn't exist anymore. It didn't, there was nothing. Not even, you would think the steel beam at the bottom would still be there. It was gone. Totally gone.
Mike Stroop was living with his family in Pierre during the flood. His father, John Stroop, was working in Spearfish and was set to head back to Pierre for the weekend. Mike says they don't know what happened, but that they found his father's car in a tree. After receiving word that his father was injured but okay, communications fell silent.
She packed up the kids, there were 7 of us, and came to Rapid, and at that point, everything was chaos, and the roads they weren't letting people in and all that stuff.
The Stroop family searched the hospital and didn't find John Stroop, but made a trip to a funeral home where they came face to face with their worst fear.
And that's how it happened. So, what actually happened, I really don't know.
As the years have gone by, both Del Rita and Mike have, in a way, rebuilt. Del Rita and Don eventually moved to a house in Rapid Valley where they've been for the last 47 years. Mike Stroop moved to Pierre where he currently resides with his family. But through their stories of loss, one message shone through.
And what you lose, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. If you have all this expensive furniture, diamond rings, which Don lost a diamond ring, but it's in the mud somewhere, who cares? Who cares? But yeah, it just doesn't matter.
The Oral Histories Project will include many others recounting their stories of the flood. Those stories will be on the Rapid City Public Library's podcast and archive. And for links to those stories, head to our website, nc1.tv.
For that warning, for the National Weather Service back in '72 to issue that warning, they had to call up Sioux City, Iowa, the hydraulic center, and get permission from them to issue a warning.
Wow.
And I don't know if the folks know this or not, but the National Weather Service did not have a radar on site. The radar that they were using was out at Ellsworth Air Force Base. And the link to that radar was inoperable that evening, so they didn't have that. They did not have radar information.
The link to the radar to detect the rain was inoperable.
It was inoperable. So our research program, which was a cloud seeding research program, we had our radar up on Radar Hill. They were passing information, radar information, onto the National Weather Service for them to ingest and decide whether or not to put out a flood warning.
You were a part of the cloud seeding program.
Yeah.
And I get questions about that, and I get statements from people.
People still believe the cloud seeding caused the flood.
You don't think it did?
No. It did not. two methods of cloud seeding, one using salt, one using silver iodide. Silver iodide will introduce a dynamic effect to the clouds and make the clouds grow taller, get more inflow into the clouds, bring in more moisture into the cloud. It's a dynamic effect. That night we were seeding with salt, and all salt does, it doesn't increase the amount of moisture in the cloud, it just changes the cloud drop distribution, introduces raindrop size drops in the cloud, which cause them to collide against cloud droplets, which causes them to grow into a raindrop size, and then it would break, and then now you have two raindrops colliding with cloud droplets, allowing it to grow. So all you're doing with salt is just making the cloud a little bit more efficient early on in its life. And once the cloud seeding is stopped with salt, then it's over with, it's done. About 3 in the afternoon, they were seeding clouds just northwest of Sturgis, and they followed those, and I think 1,400 acre-feet of moisture, of rain came from that. 1,400 acre-feet, which is a light shower.
It wasn't even happening in the same area?
No. And then around 4 or 5, we were seeding clouds down near Fairburn, which is south and east of Rapid City, about 50 miles.
Yeah.
And we were seeding clouds there. And again, with salt, which is not a dynamic seeding scenario, we watched that cloud. Those clouds are moving quickly. They were in that low-level jet, so they were moving at 40 to 45 miles an hour. But they rained out before they reached the Black Hills. So I'm convinced that cloud seeding had nothing to do with the flood. That flood was going to happen with or without us seeding those two little areas. And that's the message, and that's the reason why every year, I mean, this flood needs to be brought up again and again, and just to keep it in people's back of their minds that these kinds of situations have happened and they can certainly happen again.
Your reflection on where we are now, Rapid City as a community, do you think it developed the community in a certain kind of way? You think
the resilience of the good question. Yeah. The resilience of those people is incredible. That's Rapid City. That's the Black Hills folks. I mean, they bounced back, and they certainly bounced back. I mean, their homes were floating down the creek. Homes that they built, lived in for 20, 30 years are now gone. And they were told, you can't build again in the floodplain because we're going to have this beautiful green space.
Yeah.
To get over that and to accept that and to come back again, and all these businesses that flourished again after the flood, that were lost but came back. It's incredible. So the resilience of this community shows every day, I think. Every day that the people that you meet, that I meet, you just sense that they're very strong. They're South Dakotans. They're South Dakotans. Here we are, 2022, growing and strong, and
heck of a place to live.
Heck of a place to live, you bet.
Bob, I thank you for your time.
Oh, you bet. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I've never seen a storm cloud like that before. It just built over the hills and just turned black and green and just sat there all day long.
I had just graduated from high school on May 23rd, and it was 3 days before I turned 18 years old. We lost some property, but you know, we're just lucky that we didn't lose any lives.
Well, I was a 23-year-old kid, so it was just kind of an adventure for me, but a sad adventure, I guess. You know, it's just, you're in awe of the devastation, you know, that water would have that much power.
As we were leaving, you know, you could hear people screaming for help, and you could see whole houses floating down Rapid Creek, and there were like oil barrels on fire and things like that, and that you don't forget that.
We just went to bed. We didn't think it was going to be that bad, so we went to bed. When we woke up, the trailer was moving. Travel trailer. And that's about it.
And your house?
Well, I don't know. I ain't found it yet. I ain't found my truck either.
72 on June the 9th, when the rain that fell made the waters rise. Canyon Lake lost its dam that night and took all but higher ground. And you found them on Jackson Boulevard, waist deep in their own front yard. And you thanked the Lord the car could start. Then you went for higher ground. Well, if I ever learned a thing from my father, it's never feel hell or high water. Even when there's problems all around, you just look for that higher ground.